Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Today We Wrench. Today is going to be Wet Wednesday, which means we're working on Seadoos. Real quick, only 20% of you subscribe, so if you don't want to miss any of this content, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. On today's episode, we're going to be rebuilding a 787 Seadoo engine. Alright, so obviously we're going to have to disassemble this first. So before I disassemble the entire engine, I'll treat it as if this is in the ski. Obviously it's going to be a little bit harder because you'll have a hull to work around, but I'll show the safest way to remove the bearings, wrist pins, clips, everything if you're going to do just the top end. Alright, so for these cylinder jug bolts, we're going to use a 13 mil with an extension because the backs are a little bit deeper. Alright, so next we're going to pull these pistons off, which means that we have to take one of the C-clips out. So I usually go from this side because it's easier to push my wrist pin out through this way instead of interfering with this. Now if this was in the ski, you'd want to put towels inside so that when you take the wrist pin out, the cageless bearings don't fall down into your crank, because if they do, then you're going to have to disassemble the entire engine, even if you have a good crank, to get those out. So let's remove the C-clip, we'll pull the wrist pin out, and we'll pull the piston off. So I can't remove this C-clip that's in here because it's not exposed in this groove. So I'm going to actually do it from the other side. Alright, so to get these out, I usually use my 3/8 extension because it fits perfectly with the wrist pin, and we're just going to try to push it out, but most of the time from heat and age, it's going to be in there, so you might have to get a hammer to tap it a little bit out. Once you feel your extension go through your actual connecting rod, you're going to stop because this is a cageless bearing. So you're going to tilt it as far this way as you can and slowly kind of wiggle out your extension and try to catch all of these cageless bearings. If those were in your engine, you'd have to pull the entire thing apart. Alright, so we're going to take the flywheel case apart. So we're going to remove our oil feed lines. You take these lines off, keep these, because I don't know, I prefer them over zip ties, but you can zip tie it as well. So we're going to take this front case off now, and then we will show you how to remove the flywheel with a flywheel removal tool. Alright, so for these bolts, it's a 10 millimeter. For your oil pump bolts, make sure you hold on to these because this one's going to be significantly longer than this one. For your oil pump bolts, you are going to be using a 4 mil Allen key. This will not be able to come out now. It'll have to come out after this case comes off. On 96 and 95s, this will pull straight out, but on 97, 98, and 99 and up, these are around your flywheel bolt, so you can't remove it unless this case is off. There's two notches. There's one on this side, on the top, and there's one on the bottom. You're just going to go in there, you're going to turn your flathead on its side. You're going to go on this side so that it's even pressure, and you're going to do the same thing, and then just wiggle it on and off. And this is your Magneto. This looks really clean. If there's a lot of metal shavings, you're going to want to clean this up. Most importantly, you're going to look at this bracket that holds the pickup. Some of them had an error and they rust away and the pickup breaks, which causes a no spark issue. So inspect this, and if it's okay, just clean up these metal shavings out of here and reuse it. Alright, so for this step, we're going to move it to the floor so we can get better leverage, and we're using a 1 1/16 on a 1/2 inch breaker for our flywheel bolt. Alright, so next we're going to pull this flywheel assembly off, and for that I use this flywheel puller tool. It has threads inside of it so that you can put it around. You'll see when you look into the flywheel here, these threads that are in the inside, this flywheel tool goes into that. And you can get these flywheel tools on osdmarine.com. I will put the link in the description. Back on the floor now to get better leverage, and I'm using a breaker bar. So let's see how it goes. So when you remove this, make sure that you keep track of this lock washer that's for the entire assembly. Don't lose the lock washer. So we're going to put these two on the side, and now we're going to take this whole assembly off. Again, these are 10 mils. Take your starter off first because there's an Allen key bolt underneath the back, which is number 6. So take your starter off, then we're going to take these off and pull the rest of the assembly apart. This is gasketed all the way around on this other side, so it's going to be stuck on. You probably won't be able to pull it that much. If you can't, just tap with a rubber mallet on the outside and then pull straight out. If you have oil in your crankcase at this time, it's going to start seeping past this. So if you have a bunch of it, it's a good idea to put something over it and start catching that oil that's going to come out, because it will spill out. Working our way through the engine, we're going to take off this rotary assembly cover, and then inside of it will be a wheel, and we'll move on to taking this plate off and splitting the case. We're going to take off the mounting plate, and these are just 13s. We're going to flip the engine over. Again, if you have oil in it like this one is, it's going to spill everywhere, so have something down. And we're going to work on removing all these crankcase bolts. So we're going to use a 13 for the large bolts and an 11 for the small bolts. Doesn't matter what order you take it off in, just try to work in like a crisscross pattern so that it's even pressure as it's released. So now that all your bolts are out of the crank assembly, there's a slot here. You're going to just kind of lightly pry up, and then just pry up a little bit. Don't gouge this out because that's not a designated spot, but you don't want it teetering on it because it'll mash down this edge. So once it's loose, just kind of walk it off. Sometimes the counterbalance from heat cycling and age will get stuck, just not stuck, but kind of wedged in here where you can't get it out with your fingers. So just kind of go back here and lightly pry, and then lightly pry, and it'll come right out. This is your counterbalance shaft. There's a couple things to look for on this. You're going to check to make sure that everything's spinning over nicely without any chatter or like feeling like there's sand particles in there, because this is a watercraft after all. Same with this one. These bolts spin nice. And these seals, this one's a little bit bowed, but they're not dry, they're still soft, and they're all intact. So you could reuse this counterbalancer. I have them rebuilt, but this option to run this one, since the seals are okay and so are the bearings, would be just fine. All right, so next we're going to remove the rotary valve shaft. For that, we're going to use this special tool. It's so that it can pull the shaft out of it. This is also found on OSD Marine, which I will link below. You're going to have to remove the C-clip that is holding the shaft in. And for that, I use these C-clip tools. But sometimes, because of the spring rate on this C-clip, I have to use a flathead screwdriver. So here's your C-clip. Put this off to the side because this obviously needs to be put back in. And now we're going to use our puller to pull the shaft out. Leave the crank in so that it's not just spinning its gear. It needs something to bite onto. So leave your crank in. It will not damage the rotary gear. So now that you have your C-clip out, you're going to use your puller tool. You're going to place it over the center. You're going to screw your bolt into the actual shaft until it's tight against this nut. And now you're going to use this nut. You're going to tighten this to pull it out. Before we remove this crank, we're going to take off this shim that's on the back, which we need to put it back together, and we're going to take this seal out. Make sure you keep this O-ring that is going to be on your crankshaft because you will have to reuse it unless it's torn, so make sure you inspect it to make sure it's okay. And now to remove this, because of its age and heat cycles, again, it's wedged in there. So we're just going to take a larger screwdriver and we're going to gently pry. Your rotary shaft goes into this bearing that's pressed into the case. I always like to remove them because I like to clean everything up behind it. So for that, I'm going to use this blind hole puller. And once it's removed, we'll just clean out all the debris that could be back there, check the bearing to make sure it's okay, and then we'll assemble it back using an appropriate socket size. Alright, so now that our case is apart, we have two options. Option one would be to clean the entire case out, scuff it up with a Scotch-Brite pad, prep it ready for paint, and assemble it. Or what I like to do is I send it out to my powder coater, and he uses a very fine media, and he'll sandblast everything for me so that it's perfectly smooth. And then I'll just go back and I'll clean up all the gasket surfaces with a special tool. I like this way best, but some people might not be able to use a blaster. Maybe you don't have one local to you, or just you don't want to spend the money on it. But this for painting when I restore things is the best route to do it. I always do this. I've never had any issues. That concludes this video. On the next video, we'll be rebuilding that engine from the ground up. Thanks for tuning in.